So this will be information only, which going forward, if it says information only on the agenda, I'm going to take that as strictly information only, means no questions, no comments. It's just somebody briefing out information to us. So I want to make that clear for just any future item from anybody.
Looking at you, Denise.
So in this case, oh yes, so sorry, just to read the title, Quinn Dennehy and Attorney Fennell are here to present information only briefing on proposed ordinance to create a permanent race equity / DEI commission.
Great. I have some PowerPoint slides. I don't know if you could bring up the first one. So the goal is to create a citizen-led institutionalized mechanism for analyzing city systems, policies, budgets, agendas, goals, practices, and actions through a race equity lens with the goal of eliminating systemic racism within the city of Bremerton. So procedural posture, just to get everybody up to speed, the REAC or Race Equity Advisory Committee was formed by motion in 2020 in response to racial unrest in the United States and a desire to do something at the local level. This was done by motion, which didn't conform with the charter, which requires committees and commissions to be appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the city council. So this ordinance is a fix on that, to create a permanent commission where those folks would have input into both branches of government, both the executive and the legislative, where the ad hoc committee that basically dissolved at the end of last year was only advising city council. That, if you move on to the next slide, you know, one of the big things that I do when I present is try to get at the why. You know, 34% of Bremerton residents identify as BIPOC. If you don't know what BIPOC is, it's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. According to the 2020 US Census, 34% of Bremerton residents identify as BIPOC. When we look at things at a local level, a lot of things that we're looking at right now in the council priorities are about affordable housing, the ability to access resources, which goes towards median income as well as wealth. And take a look at those statistics. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised by the wealth gap that does not track statistically, right? Like if you had 30% of a population being BIPOC in a fair society, 30% of those residents, you know, the entire population, would be low income or homeless. And there's definitely gaps there. If you move on to the next one, there has been a little focus on, well, why are we just focusing on race instead of all areas of oppression? Well, if you look at social science research, women, when you look at groups of women and life outcomes and issues of social disparity, BIPOC women fare the worst. BIPOC LGBTQ members fare the worst. BIPOC people with disabilities, BIPOC religious minorities, BIPOC immigrants. So if you really want to focus on a problem, race is the problem in the United States because of our social constructs that we've dealt with through history. If you go on to the next slide, a lot of people have kind of looked at this. There's a difference between equality and equity. Equality is everybody gets the same things. Equity is looking at what people need in order to access the same opportunities. So if you look at the ball game, that's the access to opportunity. Think about housing, think about long life expectancy, think about healthcare. The fence are institutional barriers, and the different sized humans represent different oppressed groups or non-oppressed groups and what people actually need in order to assess that. If you move on to the next slide, I really like this. This is reality. If you look at the history of racism in the United States, the person on that, you know, 6 boxes plus being tall are us. It's white folks. And then you go to the right, the hole that has been dug by institutions, by laws, by structural barriers is where people of color start off. And then you can look at what equality, equity, and then liberation, which is really what I get excited about, is removing barriers for all anyway. But really what we want to try to go is going from reality to equity before we get to that liberation state. So the way we do that at the local level, and a lot of local jurisdictions have done, I think you can go on to the next one, is through the ordinance. So as you look through the ordinance, what I did is I provided 2 ordinances. I provided the comments from the ordinance that I'm sorry. So Brett and Kylie drafted an ordinance on my request based on Bainbridge Island early in 2022, I believe. We took that to the committee just as kind of like a rough structure of like, here's how Bainbridge Island does it. We took it, and over the entire year, I think we had at least 3 or 4 full meetings dedicated for the Race Equity Advisory Committee to go through and change it, make comments, go through the meat grinder. And what I promised them is that I would present that recommendation from the committee to you all. I do have that document, but I also have a document that I edited based on legal advice. There were some separation of power issues, some conforming with the charter issues. So there's a second reiteration. That one also has a couple legal comments. I'm going to clean that up before the next study session. So just go ahead and look at both the proposal from last year's REAC and the one that went through legal and myself. And these are some guiding questions that I'd like you to think about when we actually do discuss it. What would council like REAC to look like? What type of funding does council hope to provide REAC? How will council ensure REAC works with the DEI manager? How does council wish to communicate with REAC? And how do we ensure our own white privilege does not interfere with our decisions regarding REAC? Like really come from a place of, you know, just because we haven't had the same life experience and blocked opportunities that people of color have had, that should not be framing our decision-making. We should be framing it from recommendations from the community, specifically community of color. And that's where this REAC committee kind of has funneled through. With that, I'll just turn it over to Attorney Fennell, who's done a ton of work, especially with me the last year, and really is working hard to make sure that whatever our product is conforms and works really well. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm going to talk about the ordinance that is the Quinn shared that has, it's like Dennehy with legal advice, I think is the title. So when you're looking through your materials after you leave here, that's the one that I want you to relate these comments to. And it's just really the big question. So to keep in mind that the DEI person that will be on staff, that it was DEI is different than REAC in that it's a wider group. You think about like how we had the discussion about goals in 2022 about, are they going to be race centered or are they going to be wider? So that's a big question for council to consider. Is this group going to be race centered, or is it going to be all groups that have encountered oppression? So I'd say just keep that in mind. The next thing is just to consider, and this is a risk management issue, whether or not the commission will be able to accept public comment at their meetings. And this is a big one to keep in mind. For all of you who've had to moderate meetings, when our charter requires that all committee meetings be open to the public. That's our charter requirement. OPMA actually doesn't apply to advisory committees. But what happens is when that advisory committee accepts public comment, then it comes under OPMA and then subjects the members that are conducting the meeting to the OPMA requirements. It also means that whoever's moderating the meeting has to moderate in conformance with the law and the constitutional requirements of the First Amendment, which can also be an area in which the city is exposed to risk. So that's another thing, is whether or not the committee meetings are going to be advisory so that the folks at the meeting can talk amongst themselves. They could even talk outside of, you know, in smaller groups. It's a little tricky because our charter actually has that requirement, but the OPMA doesn't. If they happen to break quorum, it's not a legal issue where everyone's going to get fined $500. It would be, you know, that shouldn't happen because it's not in compliance with the charter. So that's the other one. Also, it's just look at the removal. We've had a removal come up recently in a different commission. And it's not unlike some of the other ones, I'll say that, but it's just something to think about. And so if someone on the committee was, let's say what we were just talking about, like taking an action that was subjecting the city to liability, Do you want, it might be awkward for the other committee members to be put in the position to have to make the call to remove them instead of, basically being able to be taken off the same way they came on by the council. And so keep that in mind. And other than that, the meetings and the powers and duties is a big section that came, in large part from Bainbridge Island. It's pretty specific and, you know, this is supposed to, it's just going to be codified in our code. And so, being broad might give that more flexibility. And in particular, there's some discussion about a racial equity action plan and implementation strategy. We don't have a racial equity action plan right now. Might be like, you know, a goal for council in 2024, because we have these 2023 goals related to this. Maybe that's the next step, but that's what's in here. And that's because I think that's what Bainbridge Island had. So those are things to keep in mind, and happy to keep working on this with you guys.
Last comment, sorry. I also included 2 documents from King County. I interviewed there and was offered a position that I ultimately turned down, but I was really fascinated and really impressed with these 2 documents. One is basically an assessment of all of the outcomes that happen in King County based on race. So basically identifying the problem that we all deal with: homelessness, housing instability, access to parks, Denise, you know, all of these things that are near and dear to our house, to our hearts, and how that plays out racially. And then the second document is their strategic plan from 2016 to 2022 on how they plan to address that. So I know that there's a lot of questions about, you know, why do we need this in local government? Go ahead and take these 2 weeks to mull through those documents, and I think a lot of your questions will be answered. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thanks so much to both of you. And yes, so in 2 weeks, we'll actually talk and discuss this and dig into the meat of how to best accomplish this council goal and priority and get this crafted. Excellent.